talk really quickly about the American dream. What is it? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Actually, when they originally were going to draft the Declaration of Independence, they were going to call it life, liberty, and property. They thought property was so important. And they changed it to the pursuit of happiness. But that includes freedom, mobility, and property rights. I want to talk about the importance of property rights because I think a lot of us in modern day America have lost sight of it. Talk about the shifting paradigm about property. Talk about policies and people that are affecting your property rights. And the fundamental transformation that is happening even as we speak, which is posing an existential threat to America and freedom. So the importance of property rights. Have we lost the significance of that? Are we taking property rights for granted? John Adams said that property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. And George Washington said that private property and freedom are inseparable. James Madison said that the purpose of government is basically to protect property. Far cry from what we're doing right now. And the founders enshrined those thoughts in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, where they said no person shall be deprived of property without due process. And if they are deprived, they have to be justly compensated for that property. More recently, Hernando de Soto wrote a great book called The Mystery of Capital. And he's a Peruvian gentleman, and he was looking around the world and he said, why is America wealthy? What is it about America that makes it wealthy? And he came up with the fact that America is wealthy because we have the ability to have private property rights. And actually 70% of small businesses in the US are started with equity loans on personal homes. We take for granted that you can go and buy a piece of property and within less than a week that property can be transferred to somebody else. If you sell it, the title can be transferred. And the reason that happens is because we have systems in place all across the country that allow you to track title through the years of who's owned the property and whether it has a lien on it or not. In developing nations, it takes 10 to 20 years to register ownership of property. And in some cases, over 100 bureaucratic steps. All of those guys with their hand out for kickbacks. And so it's a real significant difference. What we take for granted in this country is unique. It's one of America's reasons for our exceptionalism. He also went on to say in his conclusion of his book, is really the only way to reduce property is to have people have access to, the only way to reduce poverty, is to have access to property and have access to capital that you're able then to turn into a business. And to build wealth, property rights are mandatory. The Economic Freedom Report just came out about a month ago for 2013, and it talks about the 4 cornerstones of economic freedom. 3 of them are there, and the 4th one is, guess what? The protection of persons and their property from aggression by others. So property is essential, and that's really the initial paradigm under which the United States was founded. Protection of property rights under the rule of law is critical to freedom. But what's happening about property today in the United States of America? There's a paradigm shift. We're going from equal justice, which is what the founders originally intended, to the concept of social justice. And we're moving from the concept of equal opportunity of effort to the concept of equal outcomes. And all of those have implications for property. So the new paradigm, and this is something that the Economic Forum pointed out in their report, they said they were just amazed in the United States that in an attempt to appear socially just and environmentally conscious, Americans have displayed an unbounded willingness to welcome property right infringements and even confiscation. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, what's going on, the new paradigm of property. And if you look at this definition here about property, it talks about the public control of land use is indispensable. This comes from the UN. They're in their philosophy, and we're going in this direction, and I'll show you a specific example of that. But the UN says land cannot be controlled by individuals, private property leads to social injustice, and land must be used in the interests of society as a whole. So it's a complete 180-degree difference from where we are, where our founders were when they set up this country and why we've become so wealthy as a country. So we have policies that are shifting. We have politicians, planners, and poachers that are taking advantage of this. And we're doing fundamental transformation. So let's talk about the policy component first. What you'll see when you are dealing with a lot of these programs that are going on anymore today in the United States is a term called sustainable community strategies, or smart growth. That has a certain specific meaning. You'll see calls for what's called visioning sessions for public input. These things are meetings where they're already decided what the outcome is going to be before the meeting takes place. They're just going to herd you into the correct decision. And they're using regionalization to turn over property rights. So let's start with a definition. Smart growth is an urban planning and transportation theory that says growth should be concentrated in one particular area. We want transit-oriented development. We want walkable communities. We want bicycles. We want things called complete streets and mixed-use development with a range of housing choices. This is the definition of smart growth. Sustainable development is defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And people listen to that and they think, well, that sounds reasonable. But the question is, who makes the decision about what is sustainable? Who makes the decision about future generations' needs? And it all comes from a philosophy of scarcity and austerity. In other words, there's not enough to go around, there's a limited pie, we have to conserve this pie, otherwise we're going to run out. And that's the whole basis behind smart growth and sustainable development. And in order to accomplish it, you must have control and social engineering. Because most people, when they really understand the implications of these policies, do not want to live like this. So I'm going to talk specifically about what's happening in the Bay Area, but I want you to know that this is happening all across the country. It has different names, but it's all essentially the same thing. Plan Bay Area is a regional plan. Has anybody here heard of it, other than the people that that know me? Okay, Plan Bay Area. So it's a regional plan. It's a top-down central plan. And it combines what I call the trifecta of planning. It combines for the first time land use, transportation, and housing in one plan. These things have never been combined before. The reason they're being combined now is because of a law in the state law, SB 375. It's a 25-year plan. Now, I always like to remind people that the Soviets only did 5-year plans. This is a 25-year plan. $300 billion is at stake. The state is dictating the housing. States, I was amazed when I learned about this. States go to the region and they say, we think the region is going to grow by X number of people in the next 25 years. And the region then, an unelected board of people, says, okay, we're going to grow by this much. Every single city in the Bay Area, all 101 cities, you have to take this amount of people. This is your housing quota. And they dictate to every single town in the Bay Area what their housing quota is for the next 8 years. They run on 8-year cycles. It's called the RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So you've got somebody coming into your community who's not part of your community, telling your community how many houses it has to be prepared to build. And not only that, they tell your community what income levels must be accommodated. So you have to have a certain percentage at a very low income, median income, and high income. So the state dictates the housing numbers and the type of housing. The region dictates land use, mass transit. It allocates the housing. And the cities offer up something called PDA, which is priority development areas. And if you look here, the priority development areas are, surprise, surprise, right along mass transit lines. Now, when you listen to these politicians talk, they always tell you that you have a choice, that the cities have a choice, and they do have a choice. They can choose not to have a priority development area, in which case they lose their funding. Or they can choose to have a priority development area, but their only choice, if they have one, is where I'm going to put it, not whether or not I have one. And in order to make this thing work, they've come up with land use and transportation policy toolbox. Now, in the old days of America, we used to say, build it and they will come. Well, in modern day America, they say, we will build it and we will force you to come. We will force you with regulations on zoning, road pricing, parking policies, growth boundaries, fees and subsidies, and different kinds of incentives. And I like to call this the toolbox of tyranny. And when they first started the plan, this is the toolbox that I was telling you about, and they had 5 different alternatives that went with the plan, and they actually were supporting alternative number 2, which they called the Jobs Housing Connection. So in theory, according to their plan, if they build this a certain way, jobs are going to suddenly appear. And you can see on each of these, they've determined what they're going to do in those particular areas to deal with that. This smart growth, sustainable development has 2 components, and the Plan Bay Area has 2 components. One component is the urban component, and we like to call this the stack and pack component of the plan. And the other component is the open space component, which is the rural component. They get the urban component going with these priority development areas, which I told you about earlier. And they get the open space component going, the rural component going, with what they call priority conservation areas. So this is the new property paradigm. You don't see anywhere in that conversation a discussion of private property and whose property is what. And they'll use a lot of euphemisms like open space. What does that mean? Well, in a lot of cases, it's somebody's private property that they want to take. This is a map of the Bay Area, and all of these things in red here, this is mostly the South Bay. There's another map that goes up higher. These red areas are all priority development areas. The smart growth uses land use regulations that force Americans to live in much denser living environments, curtail your freedom of choice in housing. You'll be very limited in where you can go. Over the next 25 years, I think less than 5% of housing can be built outside of these priority development areas. So you can pretty much kiss single-family housing goodbye. And what will be built will be very expensive and probably on a large number of acres. It promotes class warfare because you get into this issue of we have to make everything even for everybody, equal outcomes. It compels people to pay more for their homes. And the ultimate objective is they want you to give up your car in favor of subways, trolleys, buses, and bicycles. They're going to limit your mobility is basically what they're going to do. This is the rural component. These are the priority conservation areas. We have an organization, one of the groups that I call the poachers, if you will, the stakeholder groups. It's called Greenbelt Alliance. They say they're in favor of open space and preserving property. They come up every year with a document, or every couple of years with a document called At Risk. This is property that they don't own or is not controlled by any public entity or set aside. And so they have visions of doing things to make take these properties out of production and put them into open space. And in a lot of cases, these are somebody's private property. Well, how do they do that? Don't we have property rights in the United States? Let me just back up. So open space, this is a very interesting statistic. In the Bay Area, less than 800,000 acres of the 4 million acres of the Bay Area actually have development on them. Everything else is some kind of open space. So how do they get around, if this is somebody's private property, how do they deal with it? Well, there's something called ballot box planning. Ballot box planning. What does that allow you to do? In Alameda County, it basically allowed the Sierra Club to put a measure on the ballot dealing with private property in East Alameda County, and they asked people in Alameda County, 1.7 million people in Alameda County, there's probably maybe 200 ranchers at the most out in the east part of Alameda. So they asked 1.7 million people in Alameda County, hey, wouldn't it be great if we preserved all of this property out here to the east? Wouldn't it be great if we preserve that as open space? And guess what? They voted, yes, let's preserve this as open space. So basically what you had was a majority of people making a decision on somebody's private property. So no individual rights were taken into account here. The interesting thing about this is that what sounds great on a petition is very different in reality. So this is something that was videotaped at a hearing where a rancher who lives out in this area that has now been declared open space, it's called Measure D, is asking the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, can I please put a shelter on my private property so that I can protect my hay?
But, you know, when you have a piece of property in Alameda County that you need to pay the mortgage on, you have to make a living at it. And we're doing our very best to do that.
This is somebody from an organization called Friends of Livermore. They are not your friends. They are eco-bullies, just like the Sierra Club.
The problem is that he has too many horses on too little land.
I can't even buy enough hay to last longer than 2 weeks because I can't put it under a roof. Hay has gone from $9 a bale 3 years ago to $18 a bale today. I mean, it's making it very difficult to live in this county as an agricultural person. And you're seeing more of us go away and 12,000 square foot homes being built.
This guy is the architect of Measure D. You know, when you see these measures on the ballot, you see some really nice, fuzzy, warm, we're going to preserve agricultural property, and nobody ever reads the fine print. And this guy, I won't say it, just listen to the arrogance of this person.
The board has a free hand to further restrict the development and use of land, but it does not have a free hand to loosen the restrictions that Measure D imposed on the development and use of land.
I note he didn't mention the agricultural protections, yet the measure purports to save out agriculture. Anyone truly supportive would be talking to the ranchers in a non-adversarial manner, interested to know what can be done to support their efforts.
So this is one of the supervisors in Alameda County, and what you're going to hear next is his solution to the problem.
I'm really getting lawsuit shy.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want to be sued by you guys. We talked about transfer, property transfer or density transfer, whatever you want to call it, or paying to a land trust, things like that.
So let me translate bullcrap into English here. What Supervisor Haggerty is proposing is that this equestrian owner, in order to have the privilege of putting a shelter on his own private property so he can store hay, what Supervisor Haggerty is suggesting that he buy another piece of property and give it to the Sierra Club. This is extortion, and this is happening in our county. This is happening all over. I just happen to know what's going on in Alameda. So the next person you're going to hear from is Supervisor Nate Miley, and my hat is off to this man. When Measure D started, he was actually somebody who represented Oakland, and he really didn't understand a lot about what was going on out here in the more rural areas. And he admits that initially he was in favor of Measure D, but once he now has this equestrian center as part of his constituency, and once they spent some time educating him about what was really going on as opposed to the BS that he was hearing from the Sierra Club, he changed his position, and now he's been supporting the ranchers. So this is Nate, and this is really a great interchange here. He's talking to the Sierra Club turkey.
You, the Sierra Club, you are not, sacrosanct. You are not almighty. You are not without error. So the Sierra Club doesn't always get it right. And so we're trying to do just something very, very specific that's going to help an agricultural type use. So that's why I'm sticking very firm on this particular matter. So I just wanted to point that out to you because you and I are going to continue to disagree on this one. And when you say we can go in the reverse to restrict property, but we can't do something technical to help agriculture, it's like, I just think that's crazy.
Probably if you asked 90% of the people in Alameda County, they had no idea what they were voting for when they voted for Measure D. If the Sierra Club wants that property, they should pay for the property. They should go to the individual ranch owners and buy the property.
What people don't realize is the Sierra Club is a multi-billion-dollar business, and which is what Elizabeth was alluding to. And these people do not pay money. They use the force of government to essentially steal property or your use of your property from private property owners. So this last part here, this is a video that's about 6 minutes long. If you look at the whole thing, it's on my YouTube channel. And this was narrated by Sally Z. I want to thank Steve. He put the video together for us. But here's the kicker.
Here is the fundamental question. Are we a nation that respects private property and individual rights? Or are we slaves to the government and special interest groups like the Sierra Club? The implications are profound. If private property rights are blatantly violated, then our very liberty is in jeopardy. Either you have the right to own property, or you are property. Wayne Haig, property rights activist.
On a broader level, I would recommend a book by Elizabeth Nixon called Eco-Fascists. It's about how radical conservationists are destroying our natural heritage. She's got a lot of great statistics in there about what's happening with the rural component of property. Just a couple that I want to cite here. 700 million acres in the United States have been set aside for preservation. That's 1/3 of the land mass of the United States. Another 213 million are proposed or targeted to be set aside. 1,400,000 ranches and livestock operations have gone out of business. And the land has gone into land trusts that's shot up 500%. Well, when the land goes into a land trust, it's not used. It's preserved. The other component that happens is that the people who are talking about having open space so that everybody can go out, and I love open space. I have dogs. I like to let my dogs run. But the thing is, there's always a trade-off. If you're in economics, there's a cost-benefit analysis. And very few people in the government are doing this cost-benefit analysis. They're just saying, do we want open space? Yes. Do we want affordable housing? Yes. Well, maybe the two are incompatible on some level. And so I thought this study was really interesting. Harvard did a study on the impact of zoning on housing affordability. And the question they asked is, what makes housing unaffordable? And the answer, the question was, does America have an affordable housing crisis? And if so, why? And the answer to that question was there's no affordable housing crisis. It's because zoning and land use controls play a dominant role in making housing expensive. So all of that thing that I showed you earlier with Plan Bay Area, where we're going to restrict where we're going to build, we're going to have this area all around it as open space, that is in effect creating the unaffordable housing crisis that they then want to turn around and solve with more tax dollars. And as I said earlier, 25% of the land in the Bay Area is already protected. You can't build on it at all. So this whole concept of smart growth actually dramatically increases congestion. It increases air pollution because you're packing more people into the same area. It destroys the American dream of owning a home. Single-family homes are going to become very expensive under this plan moving forward, and most people are going to be forced to live in a stack and pack housing because that's going to be the only thing that's affordable. It dramatically increases the cost of living, and ultimately it's transferring property rights to the government because you're getting so restrictive on what you're doing with private property that you don't have the ability as a private landowner to determine what I want to do with my property. Do I want to sell it to a developer? Do I want to keep ranching it? Well, you might not have a choice, just like that rancher did in Alameda County. So back to the mystery of capital again. If 70% of all small businesses in the United States are started with equity homes on personal homes, what happens when you don't have any personal homes to get an equity loan on? That just kills the engine of small business, which is the biggest employer of people in the United States. So let's talk a little bit about the people, the politicians and the planners. And I had to come up with another P, so I call them poachers, but they're really called stakeholders. The politicians that are driving all of this are on regional boards. There's no direct accountability of to the voters. There are two organizations that are driving Plan Bay Area. One is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which in the past was just focused on transportation. Now under Plan Bay Area, they get to be involved in transportation, land use, and housing decisions. And their sister organization is the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is elected officials who are not elected to the Association of Bay Area Governments boards. They're appointed. So you have very little control as a voter on who sits on this board and whether or not you can vote them out. You can't vote them out. So there's no direct accountability. You have planners who are trained by the American Planning Association. That association is very deeply involved in smart growth and sustainable development. That's one of the things they teach. All of these planners who are advising the politicians are all going to tell them, hey, smart growth's the way to go, sustainable development's the way to go. And then and they're consultants to the politicians. So a lot of the politicians at the local level, in the city governments and the county governments, they don't have the expertise in the area of land use and housing and transportation. And so they're looking to their staff to advise them as to what to do. And most of the time the staff is going to say, hey, go with the smart growth, restrict land use, build high density housing, and put it near mass transit. That's what's going to work. These people show up at meetings. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk, is that this is not theory. This is happening right now in your local government and your county government and your regional government. And these people show up. We do not show up. The people that are paying the bills, the taxpayers, are not showing up. What are stakeholders? Stakeholders aren't individuals. They are collective organizations. They are organizations like Urban Habitat that promotes affordable housing, Greenbelt Alliance that's promoting open space. The Greenbelt Alliance people who are promoting open space are also promoting affordable housing. Well, they just made housing unaffordable by taking all this land out of production, and now they turn around and are promoting affordable housing. And guess who pays for that? The taxpayer pays for that. So these stakeholders are neither voting or tax-paying entities. These are organizations that really are in bed with the planners and the politicians to divvy up how we're going to live and grow in the future. I'm just going to show you really briefly one of the stakeholder meetings that we went to.
We are here today to implement what we had envisioned and what MTC and ABAG had envisioned in terms of complying with AB 32 and SB 375. So until we hear otherwise, that's what we're doing in these meetings, and very much need to get some input to provide for the commissioners and the ABAG board members.
Just this grand scheme, and then to run with it just makes me very nervous. And I moved to this area because I like the big backyards and things like that.
We are only equipped this morning to deal with the priorities that are up on the screen. Those are the priorities we're going to look at this morning.
But your priorities are violating.
Unfortunately, because we have a fairly packed program, we can't be fielding all of the questions that this would be raising. But those kind of questions, those kind of comments are exactly what we want to read about on those worksheets.
So this was a meeting ostensibly designed to get public input. It goes on for 2 hours. Steve in the back, who's videotaping, has gone to all of our meetings and he videotapes them. We put them up on YouTube so that people can see what's actually happening in these meetings. And what's actually happening is you have a preconceived outcome that's been decided. These are called visioning sessions. Preconceived outcome. They bring the public in, supposedly, to get their input. And then when you give them input, they don't want to hear it. They take a note. They write it down. Or we don't have time to discuss it. So that's what's going on in these meetings, and that's why we're getting railroaded to be herded, basically, if you will, in the direction that the planners and the politicians want us to be herded into. So what we're effectively doing is transforming our governmental structure. And it's not obvious initially, but when you really drill down to see what's going on, we're developing an uber government, a regional government. And if you look at the documentation that's been written, the academic papers that have been written about regionalism, they talk about the new regionalism. We have to have regionalism because local governments fail, and regionalism is a new form of government. Here's another quote from a University of Wisconsin Law School. New regionalism is a form of new governance to enhance distributive justice. This quote actually came from the Department of Transportation. It says that new regionalism proposes an institutional shift from government to governance. Those terms are significantly different. And it emphasizes public and private sector partnerships and joint ventures. The emergence of multi-level governance may provide a framework for governing mega regions. Now the question is, who do you go to, or where do you go to vote these people out? And the answer is, you don't, because they're not on the ballot. And so you've just lost your form of a representative republic, which is what we are supposed to be. So my point is, regional government is not self-government. This is a very critical issue. And yet in the Bay Area, we've just been rolling along with this Plan Bay Area. There's been very little publicity. There's been very little, we're starting to get a bunch of people together and express some outrage, but nowhere near what there should be if people really understood what was going on and if we could really get some publicity behind what's happening to people. And the corollary to that is self-governance is not the same as self-government. We were designed to have self-government. We are being structured into this mega governance kind of way of doing business that's going to impact not so much my future, but your future. This is your future out here. For your young people, if you want to succeed in business, if you want to start something and be an entrepreneur, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to do that, because the structure of how we do business in the United States is completely getting turned upside down. Speaking of structure, this is what we're supposed to have. Individual rights at the bottom and the most power at the bottom. You can walk in and sit in front of your city council, and you can sit in front of your mayor, and you can give them a hard time. And I've got some people in this audience here who've done just that. And you can tell them, hey, I don't like this. And they listen, right? So the way our system of government was designed was most power at the local level and least power at the federal level. Well, where are we today? We've completely turned that upside down. You've got the federal government and the state government coming down and telling the local government what they can and cannot do, and threatening them with the loss of funds if they don't comply. So you're pretty much dictating top down again what's happening. And you overlay all of that with regionalism. There are plans, for example, in Tennessee, Chattanooga plan, it's 3 states and 16 counties. Well, what happened to the state sovereignty? There's a mega region up in the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon. You know, what happened to that state sovereignty? And the whole idea of if it's local, you have more control of it, and if it's local, it can be tailored to what's unique in your neighborhood. It's not the one size fits all. And we're getting closer and closer and closer to the one size fits all. Somebody from the top who's smarter than you and me is going to make all our decisions for us. The really interesting thing, I think, about this, or one of the many interesting things, is that when they gave the justification for Plan Bay Area, they basically said, we have to save the planet, and one of the ways to save the planet is to cut CO2 emissions. And whether or not you believe in that, let's just say for purposes of discussion that you agree that we have to cut CO2 emissions. Well, we had some really smart people look at Plan Bay Area, some transportation experts. In fact, Randall O'Toole was here speaking a couple months ago. And they looked at this and they said, you know what? We're going to reduce the CO2 emissions without the need for Plan Bay Area. We're going to reduce them because technology is going to help us, because we're changing the way we're doing business. So why do we need Plan Bay Area? Well, when The Blaze came out, it's a news magazine, came out and interviewed Mark Luce, who's the president of the Association of Bay Area Governments, and they pointed this out.
Supporters of Plan Bay Area acknowledge the goal of lower emissions is being met without redesigning entire communities. But they say the law is also about better government.
Whether it was intended or not, it may have been greenhouse gases or other things that motivated SB 375. What has resulted is in a very collaborative plan between local government and the region.
Opponents of SB 375 and Plan Bay Area say this is another attempt at manipulating society through social engineering.
From an engineer's perspective, well, yeah, that makes sense, you know, so, yeah. And so just, maybe it's social engineering, but it's the good kind of engineering.
Is that good? Social engineering is the good kind of, who decides that? What gave him the right? What makes you think that he's going to make a good decision for you? What makes you think that the 35 people on the ABAG and MTC board can make a decision for the 9 million people that are going to be living in the Bay Area? You know, Adam Smith, the invisible hand of the market, all of these individual people making individual decisions over time, eventually the right solution emerges. That's not what we have here. What we have here is basically Soviet-style top-down central planning. And it's happening here in the Bay Area. It's happening all around the country. It just happens to be a little bit worse here because we're further along in the process than some of the other areas are. But it's coming, and it's not good. So let me get back to the slides. So as I said before, we're changing our form of government very subtly. Nobody, did you vote for any of this? Did you even know this was going on? What's happening? I mean, I thought there was a Constitution. I thought there was a Bill of Rights. Well, not in practice, apparently. So we either have to restore local government or we're going to be subject to bureaucratic governance. And that cannot be good. So I want to bring this up because this is, I think, very revealing. There's an equivalent of Plan Bay Area in Florida. It's called the 750 Plan. It's 7 counties over 50 years. We only do 25 years. Those guys are doing a 50-year plan. And what was really interesting about this plan is that there are 2 main proponents of this smart growth, sustainable development, 2 big architects. The gentleman on the West Coast is a gentleman named Peter Calthorpe, who's done like most of the plans out here. And the gentleman on the East Coast is Andre Duaney. And this is our buddy Andre.
What is effective are the regions, mega regions that are in formation, okay? EPA, HUD, DOT, they got together. The 3 of them got together. These are the people who paid. The idea that you actually secede from this plan instead of affecting those agencies is not the way to change the world. They'll crush you. And then there's bottom-up government in which everybody gets to come up and talk forever about anything. Subsidiarity says we design who makes what decision and when. And the principle is the smallest party that can competently make it, let's decide as little as possible now and download to others later that which actually, because they'll be more competent to do it. So this is what we did. Subsidiarity also determines that the lowest level at which some decisions are made are actually the state and not the neighbor. No way that we're going to avoid building the compact cities that the 21st century needs. There is no way we can dodge the bullet that the cars are going out, that the automobile dependency is going out. We can't dodge it in the long run. And what I would urge you to do is that whatever we do here, and partially it's due to us, whatever we do here, that it be done fast. You know, we don't need to have more public meetings like this. We should just finish the thing and you should pass it. Okay, that's what should happen. Okay, you should just trust us and pass it. To be effective, this plan has to transcend the local and transcend the temporal. And fascism, you can say what you like, but it's efficient. You know, we don't need to have more public meetings like this. We should just finish the thing and you should pass it. Okay, that's what should happen. Okay, you should just trust us and pass it. And fascism, you can say what you like, but it's efficient.
Well, at least the guy's honest. I have to give him that. So what we're talking about here is an excess of power, and this is one of the comments that James Madison made, which is where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. And it allows arbitrary seizures of one class of citizens in the service of others. And that's what's going on here. We have an existential threat. We are incrementally collectivizing our private property in the United States. Now, this happened in the Soviet Union and it happened in China. We should learn from history. But in those 2 cases, because of the nature of the society, they were able to just go, you know, some strong men were able to go and push people into the collective farms. They can't do that in the United States. They've got to be a lot more subtle. So we do the steady drip drip. but we end up in the same place. And that's where we are today. We're getting to the point where it's going to get harder and harder to maintain private property rights unless people like you guys start getting involved and getting concerned with what's happening in the local communities, because it's your future. What they're doing is they're putting in place a fundamental transformation. It's the infrastructure to destroy private property rights. It's that Death Star, and it's up there, man. And it's almost done, and that beam is pointing right at all of the private property in the United States. And just to kind of seal the deal here, this is a quote from one of the individuals in one of the non-governmental organizations that's promoting smart growth and sustainable development. And he says individual rights will have to take a backseat to the collective in the process of implementing sustainable development. Is that what you want? You want the collective to make your decisions? I sure don't. And as has happened always when you get big government, first they start with the nudge, then the next step is shove. And in the Bay Area, we're getting to the shove place because we have a bunch of activists who are out there who are challenging Plan Bay Area. We've got people all around the Bay Area who are going to these meetings, raising a ruckus. I would now like to ask my buddies to stand up who've been, come on, Judy, Susan, everybody, stand up. Come on, stand up. These people are on the front lines, and they've been going to these meetings to try to stop this. It's your future. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the Soviet Union and China, they get to shoot. These people are serious. So hopefully we won't get to that stage. Hopefully we can turn this around. But you had a gentleman last presentation talking about why socialism always fails. And he said that in the present. It fails. Because ultimately, in order to perfect the socialist dream, it does get to aggression. It does get to force. There's no way to make all of this happen without force. So back to Fraser's economic analysis. The United States is now 17th. In the year 2000, I think we were number 1 or 2. If you look at the Rich States, Poor States document that I got last time from you guys, California is 47th. That's because we're leading the nation in all of this planning, right? 47th out of 50 in terms of economic freedom. And if you look at that chart there, where it really started to go downhill for the U.S. is in the red line, where it really started to go downhill was right around the year 2000, which, there are a lot of other factors, but one of them is what's happening with our private property rights. So what I talked about today was the importance of property rights, how we're shifting the property paradigm, some of the policies and the people involved in this shift, how we're in the process of a fundamental transformation, and the fact that it really is an existential threat. It really is out there, and we really need to be involved to try to stop this. I want to end with one of my favorite people, who is Mark Levin. He's a constitutional attorney. He has a radio show from 3 to 6 in the Bay Area. And last April, a gentleman named Wendell Cox, who actually wrote something for our Against Plan Bay Area for us, he had written an article that showed up in the Wall Street Journal called California Declares War on Suburbia. And it was about these kinds of plans. It was about the kind of thing I was talking to you. So this article appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and Mark Levin did like a 10-minute monologue going off on this article. So I want you to listen to just a couple minutes of Mark. He's got a great book out called Ameritopia. If you want to see where we're going and what the historical background is for where we're going, this is all utopian ideas. The smart growth, sustainable development, all the things that are happening with property rights, it's utopian statism. And this book, Ameritopia, is really good at laying out the intellectual arguments that get you from those philosophical opinions to where we are today in America.
with Obamacare in place on health care, with local zoning like this in the state of California. Just think about it. You won't have to make any decisions for yourself. You know how many of you work in little cubicles? Now you'll live in little cubicles. You won't need automobiles, and you won't need private health care. The government will decide what you get and what you don't get. Folks, this is Thomas More's utopia. Folks, this is tyranny looking you in the eyes. I'd love to put a smiley face on this. I really would. But there's nothing to smile about. This is coming to the rest of America, too. No question about it. We're not running out of land. We're not running out of natural resources. We're running out of liberty. We're running out of private property rights. The government just keeps pushing us around, coercing us. Whether it's your local, city, township, county, with their zoning rules, which are out of control, or your state, which piles on top of the federal government with the phony environmental laws and so forth, and of course the federal government, which we've talked about ad nauseum. The government comes between you and your private property endlessly, not just through taxation and regulation, but through zoning, control of the automobile, and so much more. I don't have an answer right now, folks, but I'm going to tell you what's happening in California is going to spread east and do it fast.
So we're not running out of land. We're running out of liberty. That quote has stuck with me ever since I heard it. And it's what keeps me going. Because I want liberty not only for my generation, but for your generation. So let me close with one final quote, and then I'll be happy to take questions. There's a gentleman named Wayne Hagee who fought the federal government for, I think, over 20 years over what they were doing to his private property. And it was back and forth in the courts and appeals and appeals. And remember, the government has unlimited funds and unlimited time. And this was a private individual. He finally won, at least the last thing I heard. He actually died over this took so long. But his estate won. I think this was the last appeal to the Supreme Court. But he said, you either have the right to own property or you are property. Think about that. Think about that.